My friend, welcome to the world's best kept secret podcast, a podcast that brings you exclusive interviews from experts all over the world with life-changing work that you didn't even know existed. I'm your host, Prima Jope, a partner for those that are ready to take their life-changing work in front of those whose life or business depends on it. Please follow or subscribe for more. When I was growing up, I used to ask my mom how hard it was to be a parent, and she would smile. My mom is the kind who will avoid any conversation if she can. She'll avoid conversations about sex, about boys, about anything. And so I used to ask her, how hard is it to be a parent? And then she would smile and she would say, it depends. And I would say, it depends on what? Then she would say, it depends on who you choose to do the job with, who you choose to parent with. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, you see, it all depends on the choices in life. So if you choose wrong and you have the wrong partner for you, chances are they will be a nightmare when it comes to doing anything, pretty much. And so she said, what you can do for yourself is slow down and make the right choices for you. And I'm excited today because my guest, that is all her work is about parenting. Parenting does not have to be rocket science. It gets to be easy. Children deserve the best in life. Children deserve to go through life without the trauma that comes from parents. Children deserve the best in life. And so when you're in a situation where you're dysfunctional as a family and the marriage doesn't work out and you bring children to the planet, you get in the way of these children. And I love AJ's work because AJ is an advocate for children, and her work really helps parents who want to protect their children from being traumatized and affected by the wrong parenting, or parents who really can't do it together, parents who just can't coexist and push these problems to the children. They don't have to be involved. And without getting in the way of my own self, I want to bring up AJ to really educate us and bring us along in her work. And I want to go deep with her because I think that her work is like generational changing. I feel like her work empowers the young generation to really show up and be better people, better parents. If you parents missed the ball, you probably missed the ball, your children will miss the ball. And that really just keeps rolling around and rolling around and rolling around. And I love what AJ does because she kind of empowers us to say, you know what, whatever parenting issues I have end with me. I'm not going to transfer this to my children. AJ, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to be diving in.
Thank you, Prima. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us what you really do, because I have a habit of, summarizing what people do and leaving out the best parts of what they do. So tell us what I missed out in how you help people exactly.
Well, I first want to start by saying thank you very much for that introduction. You pretty much captured most of what I do, and you're absolutely right. Parenting can be so difficult, but it doesn't have to be. And there's lots of things that we can do, especially when the world kind of throws unexpected turns in our lives that we weren't necessarily anticipating, right? So what I do is I specifically work with parents who are going through a high conflict divorce or who have been through a high conflict divorce. It's high conflict because the other parent might have been abusive. The other parent might have mental health issues. They might be relationally complex. There might be addiction issues there. Things like that. That is what's contributing to making the divorce very high conflict. Now, the thing you see with high conflict divorce is when the parents separate, the high conflict parent tends to parent in a very authoritarian way. So it's very dictatorial, very top down, no choice and voice for the children. And that doesn't always work well for the children. So what you see with those children then is they're experiencing quite a bit of trauma in that environment.
Mm.
And that's contributing to their own development, their own brain development, their own social emotional development or lack thereof. And then when these kids go back to the non-high conflict parent, so the healthy parent, I have parents coming to me and saying, I don't know how to support my children because I'm seeing extreme behaviors and I'm seeing a lot of emotional outbursts. And I know that they've experienced some not so great things at the other parent's house. And I don't know how to support them through that. How do I support them through their trauma? How do I, parent them in a way that builds their resiliency so that when they go back to the other parent's house, they're not experiencing or they're not internalizing that level of trauma again and again and again. So most of the parents that come to me, like I said, are very challenged with how to best support their children in a way that doesn't lead to long-term trauma and long-term negative consequences for kids, right? The reason I started doing this work was because I thought, if these kids are struggling in these dynamics, I don't want these kids to have to end up in trauma therapy for the rest of their lives, right? Like, what can we do now to support them in a way that they have the best chance possible for a healthy, psychologically and emotionally, grounded and successful life where they can just go out and do and be who they want to be and do whatever they want to do without the baggage of their trauma with them.
Wow. So if I understand correctly, is your work more of a preventive, or is it even for like children who are already having these problems from trauma? I just want to understand, like, is it more of a preventive? The parent is really aware and doesn't want their children to end up in trauma, or is it's already happening and it doesn't matter where you're at? Give me kind of the transformation visibility, because I'm kind of wondering, so is it my child is on drugs, on porn or something, or is it more like my child seems to be really walking around like a time bomb. She seems to be snapping back at me and I do not know what's happening. Like what's the actual problem that you're helping these children with?
So it's both. I would say it's both preventative
Mm,
and it's treatment based, right? So treatment based in the way of how the parent is showing up, how the parent is supporting the kid, how the
mm,
parent is doing what they can to
mm,
best help heal trauma, right? So I think there's this idea around trauma where if you want to heal trauma, it's a very complex thing to do, and there's a lot of therapy involved, and there's a very strict protocol you have to follow and things like that, all of which can be true. But I think the thing that parents probably overlook quite a bit is their own power. The best way to heal trauma, and this is, to your point of if the child is already exhibiting symptoms of trauma, the best way to heal trauma is through connection, right? There
mm,
is significant disconnect that's happening at the other parent's house. The other parent, because of their own challenges,
mm,
doesn't have the capacity to meet this child's social and emotional needs, sometimes also physical needs, right?
mm,
But more often than not, it's their social and emotional needs are not being met. So these kids are kind of lost there, right? They're living in their trauma response. They're a little bit lost there. When they come back home to the healthy parent's house, that's when we have to, like you said, damage control. We have to kind of undo the damage that was done at the parent's house, bring them back to a baseline where then, they are regulated again. And then their brain can start developing again. Then they can start moving forward in their life again, right? Because the thing that trauma does to them is it keeps them stuck and
mm,
it keeps them in a very, very, very small space, right? So when children are experiencing trauma and they're in that trauma response,
mm,
their brains have stopped developing because they've gone into survival mode,
mm,
right? So we have to make sure that we're bringing them back online so that their brains have the capacity to start developing again
mm,
and they can move forward from that, right? So I would say it's both. It's preventative. It's
mm,
preventative in the sense that most of what we see as far as divorce goes, most children are going to end up in a 50-50 custody situation.
Mm.
right? Like that is what seems to be the baseline. I've spoken to people in the UK, I've spoken to people in the States, I've spoken to people in Australia, here in Canada. 50-50 seems to be the baseline. So if this child is spending 50% of their time in a non-healthy environment or a psychologically and emotionally unhealthy environment,
Mm.
what are we going to do to help support them in not internalizing the damage that's happening, right? So
Mm.
that's where it comes back to that preventative lens of let's undo the trauma that happened, build their resiliency, build their capacity for when they go back, because this is ongoing trauma for them, because they're always going to be going back to the other parent's house.
Mm.
And then let's see what we can do to further, right? Because as we build their resiliency, we're increasing their baseline for their normal healthy development, right?
Mm. So I'm just wondering because the other parent is most likely not about to do this work. They're
Yes.
just thriving and going in their dictatorship or casualty, and they will keep trying to poison the children. It's the way that I look at your work. It's like you don't smoke, but somehow you have to put up in a smoking environment every now and then. Or the way that I look at your work is you have a garden and you weed it properly, and every now and again the weeds have to come back in. So what you're saying is, are you now the other parent continuously for as long as you have to, gonna have to keep weeding that garden? Or are we actually empowering the kids to reach a level where they can decide for themselves because they have reached that level where they can make the decision of actually where they want to spend their time or not? Or is it like a constant damage control? Let's weed, let's just do what we can for the children until they are old enough and have matured enough that they can make their own decisions?
I think it's both. I love your analogies. I love the weeding the garden piece of it, because I think that's exactly what we're doing, right? Like when they're home with us, these
Mm.
children, we're trying to help them flourish, and we're trying to help them blossom, and we're, providing them with everything they possibly could need
Mm.
to live a healthy, successful life and be healthy, right?
Mm.
Psychologically and emotionally and physically. And then it's like you said, now we're sending them off to a smoking environment
Mm.
where they just have to tolerate the smoke for a little while,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So that is absolutely what it is. And it's what you said, right? The other parent is not about to do this work.
Mm.
The other parent doesn't believe that they're doing anything wrong.
Mm.
The other parent believes that what they're doing is right for the kids. The other parent is probably coming from a lens of, I know better, and I don't know why you're telling me that what I'm doing is wrong, and I'm not about to change it anytime soon.
Mm.
So you kind of end up single parenting
Mm.
for, for the duration of the time that you have joint custody with these kids
Mm.
and with the other parent, because that's the best, right? So what I tell parents is, this is not a great situation, but
Mm.
it's the reality of the situation. So what's the best we can do for these kids
Mm.
while they are in this situation, right? So when it comes to empowering the kids, absolutely. I tell parents, let's try and empower them to the best of their capacity.
Mm.
Now, empowering these kids is a little bit tricky, because I don't want to empower them to the point where they necessarily start speaking their mind and start standing up to the high conflict parent if they don't feel safe to do so,
Mm.
right? Because if they don't feel safe in speaking up with the other parent, which they likely won't feel safe because they're going to get punished
Mm.
or disciplined extremely, discipline tends to be very, very extreme with these parents. So if
Mm.
these kids don't feel safe advocating for themselves with that parent, we're not
Mm.
going to encourage that. We encourage these kids to advocate for themselves, to have voice, to have choice, to have critical thinking skills in every single environment that we can find outside of their relationship with that parent. And what that does for these kids is it gives them the opportunity to then really look at the behaviors of that parent versus the behaviors of the healthy parent, and
Mm.
gives them the opportunity to choose, what do I want to do? What do I see? Do I think these behaviors are okay? Do I not think these behaviors are okay? What do I do now? And then, you know what, depending on where you're living, depending on what the court systems are like, depending on what things look like where you are at,
Mm.
ages in terms of when the children can decide who to live with and who not to live with is different in every country, is what I'm hearing, right? So
Mm.
it really depends. And I tell parents, we can't hold our breath and we can't wait for that moment for them to say, no, I want to live with this parent and I don't want to live with that parent,
Mm.
right? We have to do what we can with the situation we're given right now,
Mm.
because we're not just going to, press pause on their little life and
Mm.
wait for them to turn 12 or wait for them to turn 16 and then I can protect them. That's another I would say myth that parents have is, they come to me and they're in a panic and they're like, AJ, I need to get full custody. I have to get full custody. That's the only way I can protect my kid. And I'm like, actually, it's not the only way you can protect your kid.
Mm.
So let's talk about all the other things that we can do, right? I just had a client last week who came to me and she said, I cannot believe what my kids just did.
Mm.
And, she has 50-50 custody. Both of her kids spend 1 week on, 1 week off with the other parent, also high conflict. And she said, both my kids, they heard their dad say something, and both my kids stood up for themselves and defended themselves against it. And she said, dad was totally, it's the high conflict parent is the dad in this situation. And she said, dad was totally taken aback. Like, why are you speaking back to me? Why are you defending this person that I just talked about? Why are you doing this? Right.
Mm.
And the fact that those children, because of everything the mom has done and all the work we've done together, has been able to empower them to a place where they finally felt confident and they finally felt safe enough to stand up and speak up against the other parent is huge.
Wow.
Yeah,
It,
that's
it,
huge for them.
yeah, it's truly a blessing because you even understand the law. And so, I don't know, parents, I feel like a parent who's listening to this, if you're listening to this and you have a friend who is co-parenting and it's going really not so well, I don't know that there is a better place to start than somebody who understands exactly this situation and understands the law, understands the rights, and understands all of these things. And that's who we have in AJ. AJ, I want to roll back a little bit your story because I feel like not sharing your story is not doing service to anyone listening. Tell us how you got into this work and your own experience of this type of work, because I know you've lived it.
I have lived it. Thank you. So I was in a psychologically and emotionally abusive marriage for 8 years. I didn't know it was psychologically and emotionally abusive at the time, which what I've learned over the years is a fairly common experience for people who have been in abusive relationships. You're so close to it. It happens, the abuse happens so slowly and over such a long period of time that you don't necessarily recognize what's happening. So my marriage ended very, very abruptly. It was really shocking and quite traumatic in and of itself. But then as I was kind of unraveling what had happened, what the marriage was like, why it was so difficult for me to move on, that's when I started unraveling, oh, this is high conflict. Oh, this was abusive for 8 years. And this is what is happening. So I was kind of wrapped up in my own trauma of it all and trying to, heal myself.
Mm.
And by this point in time, I was very mindful of making sure I was supporting my daughter, who was 5 at the time, to the best of my ability, right? So I have an educational background in developmental psychology. I have worked with parents and children by this point, but for over 15 years, I'd supported them through, co-parenting situations before. So I knew exactly what to see and exactly what to look out for as far as behavioral presentations in my daughter and how I should support her.
Mm.
So that was fine. I saw all of that, right? But then what actually happened was I started seeing some behaviors in her that were not typical and they were not something that I expected.
Mm.
And this, when I say they were something that not that I expected, it's a matter of I had this little girl who was very happy and very happy-go-lucky and just, she was just a great, great kid, very nonviolent,
Mm.
who ended up being extremely violent.
Wow.
So she started kicking and crying and screaming and shoving and pushing and spitting
Wow.
and hitting. And it was all against me. It was all towards me, right? And I was her primary caregiver. And as I started looking at what is going on with her, because I was really struggling to support her, the
Mm.
only commonality I found was that these behaviors were presenting with her every time after a visit with her dad.
Mm.
So then I started looking into, what does it mean for children who are being raised by a high conflict parent, right? Because at that point in time, I was somewhat ignorant in terms of the domestic violence world and the domestic violence research. And I thought that because I was kind of the target of the psychological and emotional abuse during my marriage, I was the only one that was dealing with the consequences of it. My daughter was fine because she wasn't the direct target, which now we know through research and so much information that's come out is absolutely not true, right? When you have an abusive personality type, that personality type is very consistent and very persistent across time, is going to interact very similarly to people that are within their close circle. So it was a matter of time before my daughter was going to start experiencing this also. And that's where her behaviors were coming from, right? Like I had been able to remove myself from that relationship. She was still in it 50% of the time.
Mm.
So now she was exhibiting these behaviors. I didn't know what to do about it. And I thought, you know what? Like this is I like to call it like the perfect storm. Like it gave me the opportunity to look at it from a lens of, if I have the education and the work experience and the years of developmental psychology knowledge that I have, and somebody like me is struggling to support their child, I can't imagine what other people out there must have been going through or are currently going through who don't have that background, right?
Yeah.
So then, right, I did a ton of research and I looked at all the long-term outcomes that these children experience when they're being raised by a high conflict parent in a potentially abusive environment. And the long-term outcomes for these kids are not good, right? You're looking at significantly increased rates of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harm, addictions, risky behaviors, all of those things, right? And some studies show that the probability rate of one or more of these behaviors is over 95% for these kids. So when I saw that, Prima, I was like, I am not okay with this happening to my kid. So then what can we do now to make sure that we're shifting that trajectory for these kids and they're not ending up with that 95% probability? What can we do now, right? So that's when I put together my education, my experience. I did a lot of research, like years of research in attachment theory, neurobiological development, more research on developmental psychology and childhood trauma. And I kind of put all of that stuff together to then create a parenting model specifically for children of high conflict divorce, because their experiences are so nuanced and they're so different and they're challenging. And it's a model that can help specifically support these kids through the challenges that they're facing. So, and the reason for that was all the research shows that when you're dealing with divorce, healthy co-parenting offers the best long-term outcomes for children, right? And that's kind of where my mind was at. We need to find a way to co-parent in a healthy way. Now, I tried to co-parent with my daughter's dad for about 2 years, and none of my co-parenting strategies were working, right? Nothing worked. And I couldn't figure out why nothing was working until I started realizing, oh, this isn't me. This is because the other parent is high conflict. And we are never going to see eye to eye on what is in the best interest of my child, right? So when I say high conflict, I mean things like you're dealing with the same issue for years on end, right? There was an email thread that went back and forth, and I was just trying to get my daughter into therapy because of the behaviors I was seeing. But Prima, that email went back and forth for 6 months because he would not consent to therapy. It didn't matter what research I showed him. It didn't matter what, behaviors I told him that our daughter was having. It didn't matter how much I told him she was struggling. He was not going to hear it. And the biggest challenge you find with high conflict is high conflict parents tend to operate from a place of, I will make decisions that are in my best interest, always my best interest. And then you have the other parent who's trying to make decisions based on what is in the best interest of my child. And there's an inherent disconnect there, and you're never going to see eye to eye, right? So then how do you move forward? And how do you get these children the supports that they need, right? And like I said before, the thing that parents overlook is the amount of power that you as the healthy parent hold because of your relationship with your child, right? If you can show up in the way these kids need you to show up, there's so much positive things that we can do to help in that preventative lens to make sure that they're not going down that trajectory of long-term mental health and physical health challenges.
What did you in your book? You said if you have the abusive personality type, and I'm just wondering, is this something that is permanent for people? Is there anything you can do to change this? Or if you're the abusive personality, is it just your DNA, or is it something that people can actually work on?
There's a couple different ideas, I think, around that.
Mm.
So the way I see it, based on the things I've looked at and based on my own experience and what I've seen, is that Prima, these personalities are very, very rigid and they're very resistant to change. And I have heard of many, many therapists who, if they even get the slightest hint that there is a personality disorder in this person
Mm.
or they're high conflict, they will refuse to work with them because chances of this individual changing are less than 5%, right? I've heard the relapse rate or the recidivism rate, as they call it, right? As far as people going into therapy and then reverting back to their original behaviors is over 95%. So therapists are like, there's nothing I can do here. There's no positive change I'm going to be able to make here. And therefore I won't work with you. So my assumption and my working assumption is that these personalities are extremely entrenched. They're very, very rigid. They're very resistant to change, and they're not going to change anytime soon, right? And I think the reason for that is if we really take, 10 steps back and look at how this personality developed in the first place, usually when you look at high conflict personalities and personality disorders, there's a very significant link and correlation between their own early childhood trauma and the development of a personality disorder. So there's something that happened to them in their own experience and in their own childhood that led them to create, personality disorders, basically, when you really get down to them, they developed as a defense mechanism, right? To protect themselves from what was happening outside. And that's what they've hung on to. And that has now become so ingrained in them that they don't think that there's another way to be, right? So if I just look at my daughter's dad and his own experience, what I see with him is he operates from this lens of it's me against the world. The world's always out to get me. Someone's always out to get me. I always have to watch my back, and I will always draw first blood, right? If I sense that someone's about to hurt me, I will always hurt them first. And it like deeply rooted, it comes from a defense mechanism, right? Because I'm going to hurt you before you hurt me. Now, the way, unfortunately, that it plays out for these kids is they operate in the same way with these kids. So I'm in no way saying that just because these personality disorders are born out of early childhood trauma and they have their own experiences and all that, that it absolves any of the harm and the damage that they're doing, right? They cause significant harm and significant damage, both to intimate partners and people within their family sometimes, and also to their children, right? Like their own experience and how this came about doesn't change the damage that they're doing. It doesn't excuse any of it. But that's what I choose to believe as far as the history goes. I know there's a lot of parents who it's really easy to get stuck in the anger of it. It's really easy to get stuck in why don't they change and why don't they see what they're doing and why can't they do something different and all of those things. I tell my clients, I'm like, they just don't have the capacity to. Like you could stand there, what good does it do to you for your time, your energy, your efforts to stand in, let's say in front of a rock or in front of a boulder, yelling at it to grow a flower, right? A rock is never going to grow a flower. It doesn't have the capacity to. These parents, these high conflict parents, are never going to be able to parent their children in a way that their kids need or in a positive way. They're just not capable of it.
I know your heart is for children. I know the parents and marriage is not your thing, but I can't help but want to drag you in it. When you talk about a high conflict marriage, are there any chances that you could be in a high conflict marriage, but if you decided that the other person could actually make through, do you have you studied that, or do you have data on that? I wonder because sometimes you find yourself in this high conflict marriage, but then there's that hope that is in you that the person is willing and trying, and so maybe they'll change. Or are there ways to know this is high conflict and mate? Are there chances that you could be in a high conflict relationship or marriage and end up working out if the other person was open to the possibility? Educate me, because there may be someone who is in that and they have hope, or the other person seems open or seems positive. But really, if we are saying it's a rock that is trying to flower, then I think there's a problem there.
So there's lots of people, Prima, who do choose to stay in high conflict relationships for a multitude of reasons, right? There's so many reasons. The thing that we have to be super mindful of and very aware of, if that's the choice we're making, is I don't believe that person is going to change anytime soon. There's no research out there that shows that they will. There's no research that I'm aware of anyway. I shouldn't say there's nothing out there. There's no research that I'm aware of that shows that they can make positive change that is long-term and that's long-lasting. So if people choose to stay in these relationships, if you recognize it's high conflict and you choose to stay in this relationship, there is a very significant level of what I call radical acceptance that comes with that. So you have to then become very, very clear on what this relationship is, what the other person's capacity is, what this looks like, and what you're willing to accept and what you're willing to not. Because if we're going to keep pushing the other person to change and pushing the other person to do better, that's never going to work, right? Chances are that's never going to work. And chances are, if it's a high conflict relationship, there's an element of abuse that's involved there, right? Psychological abuse, emotional abuse, sometimes physical, sometimes sexual. And if we're going to choose to stay in that relationship, we also have to recognize, because there's a lot of, I've heard of parents come to me and say, okay, I want to stay in this relationship, but I still want to heal and I want to do right by my kids. And you can't necessarily do those two things at the same time, right? You can't heal in the same environment that's causing you harm. And you can't heal your children in the same environment that's causing them harm. Right? Because we also hear,
like it doesn't matter how much you try to heal, it's a life job.
Yes.
It's a life sentence. It's like you better agree that it's gonna be your life job to just be healing every day, which can really pull you back from what you can possibly be doing. Because otherwise, I think it's a full-time job.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, and when you have children involved, right? Some parents are like, I want to stay for the children so that they have, you know, a nuclear family and they don't have a broken home and all of those things. And I say, if you want to stay and you think you can protect your children while you're in a harmful environment yourself, you don't have the capacity to protect those children to the best of your ability while you are still in that environment, right? The best chance these kids have is that separation, right? Despite the fact that they end up 50% there and 50% here, you have 50% of that time to support them to the best way that in which they need to be supported, right? Rather than being around the high conflict parent 100% of the time.
Am I right in assuming that even the healthy parent or the parent that is positive and open needs to heal themselves fast before they can support the children? So the work you do somehow has to support the parent to build the capacity, or are you like on the kids and the parent has to find somebody else. Because I feel like if I am broken and not whole and not healed, I don't have capacity to actually help the children.
So one of the first things that we do before we get into the work with the children is help support the parents in healing themselves first, in getting back to their own level of self-regulation. Because if you've been living in an abusive environment for a very long time, you are likely quite dysregulated yourself. So there's a whole section that we go through in my program first that focuses specifically on the parent and their needs in order to get them as healed as possible first before they can support their kids. Because you're absolutely right. If I myself have no capacity to support my child, I can't show up for them to the best of my ability. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And part of the work is self-regulation. Part of the work is really coming to terms with the reality of your situation. Part of the work is around radical acceptance in terms of let's really get very clear on what aspects of this situation you can control and what aspects are completely out of your control. We're not going to worry about the things that are not in your control. We can only focus on the things that you can control. Right? So there's a lot of kind of mental work with the parents that happens first for them to then be able to take a step back and say, okay, now I'm ready to be able to support my kids in the best way that they need to be supported, right? And there's a lot of grief that comes with that. There's a lot of complex emotions, right? And one of them also sometimes is we hear so many times, and we hear a lot of the time, especially in the parenting world, that you get to parent the way you want and you get to show up as the parent you want to be. And I tell parents that's not always the case, especially when you're dealing with children who are not in a healthy environment for a period of time. We really sometimes have to take a step back and look at not what kind of a parent do I want to be, but we have to look at what kind of a parent do these children need? And what kind of a parenting approach do these children need? Because all children are different and they're all individuals and they all need a slightly different approach. So what's going to work for this one kid might not work for this kid, right? So how are we going to then customize this parenting approach that I have to help meet the needs of that specific child? So a lot of it, there's grief associated in that, right? Where I have to walk parents through that because it's like, I didn't think I would ever parent this way. Like, yeah, but that's what your kid needs right now, right? If we keep trying to push our own parenting style on these kids and it's not working for them, we're not actually helping them. We're not doing anything positive for them.
I really love the work you do because sometimes the best you can do for your child is not to allow them to repeat the mistakes that you did. And that can quickly happen if you choose not to raise your consciousness and how you and your choices have affected the child. I am very curious I know you have thought leadership and you've really created these frameworks that help people, but I'm very keen into understanding, is there a framework for the children and a process for the parents, or do they have intersection parts? Or take me through that. I would love to know, like, how do you support people from like a place where they probably have trauma dysregulated and all of that to a place where either they can support the children, or the children can survive. I think that the work you do helps like children get resilient enough to be able to go through the storm and still not like be swallowed by it. Because the way that I look at this child, it's like maybe the world is just pressing them down, and what they are getting is the resilience to just keep putting their head out until they are grown or developed enough not to have their history, their parents, all of that determine what is going to happen for them. And so I'm very curious with those, how you do that, how you put together your frameworks over time. And I would love, if it's okay with you, to kind of go through that so we can kind of see the steps of how that happened.
So the overall lens that I tell parents to keep in mind is the analogy that I use is, what would you do if you were told you're sending your kid camping for 7 days? Right? They're going off into the wilderness. There's no water, there's no food, there's no shelter, there's no heat, there's no nothing. Right? They're alone for 7 days. What would you do to prepare them for that? You would pack their bags with everything that they were going to need over the next 7 days. Right? That's the overall framework that I tell these parents to keep in mind when we're working together. Because what we do when we have the kids with us is we are filling them up with everything they could possibly need when they're with the unhealthy parent and with the high conflict parent, to get them to survive the 7 days with that parent until they come back to us, right? So like we already chatted about before, the first step is really getting the parents regulated, getting them to understand what they can control and what they can't, and getting them to really eliminate all other distractions, right? Because this kind of parenting can be very taxing. It's very time consuming. So we got to eliminate all the other distractions that are out there so that the parent can show up to the best of their capacity, right? And then what we do is I go through their entire week, like the time they have their kids, from the day those kids get home until the day these kids leave. What does your week look like? Right? What does the environment look like? What does transition day look like? Are you struggling on transition day? How can we improve transition day? How can we get you more attuned with what the needs of your child are? How can we get you to give them a little bit more capacity, a little bit more choice and voice, so that they feel like they have a little bit of power and control, right? What does their bedroom look like? Is it nice, calm, and soothing? What does their, do they have a quiet space where they can run away to? What do expectations and rules look like? All of those very, very complex things, we completely break it apart to see what's working for the children and what's not working for the children, right? So my parenting program basically goes through three very solid pillars, right? The first one is to relate. So the first one is we're focusing on the relationship with this kid. Everything else comes after. We're focusing on the relationship. We're focusing on creating a trauma healing relationship with this kid, right? And that is through attachment and connection and support and empathy. Then after we've kind of established, okay, this is how we're going to enhance our relationship with them, this is how we're going to continue our relationship with them, then we look at the respond aspect, right? So when there are things that come up, how are we responding to this child? How is the environment responding to this child? Is this environment working for this child? Is it not? Do we require some shifts? How mindful are we being about maintaining stability and consistency and predictability in their environment for them? So we break that apart, right? And then the third pillar is to repair and reconnect, right? Which is all relationships, including parent-child relationships, are going to have ruptures in them, right? And they're going to have moments where you're disconnected. You're going to have moments where there's a disagreement or an argument or something has happened, right? And those ruptures, I tell parents, let's not be afraid of them because they're super helpful as long as we're able to make the repair afterwards, right? So I teach children or parents the best way to kind of have those repair conversations with the children so that they can actually reconnect, they can reestablish their relationship, and actually it furthers the relationship forward to a new baseline from them, then which they can move forward again.
So this is now empowering the parents to actually do their best or give this child the best they can, learning to relate with them, learning to respond or understand their response, learning to repair and reconnect. Have you faced situations where the other parent was wanting to win over the children, but in doing so, they wanted to talk bad on the other parent? And what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, 100%. There's lots of times where I have parents coming to me and saying, I can't believe the other parent said this. The other parent is trying to turn the kids against me. The
Mm.
other parent is trying to make me look bad. You know, they're feeding all these lies to my kids and I don't know what to do about it. You know, what do I do? And I mean, first step first, right? We have to regulate the parent. Let's bring you back down.
Mm.
Let's regulate you, do some breathing exercises. Now let's look at exactly what aspect of this situation can we control. We're never going to be able to control what the other parent says. We
Mm.
can't control what the other parent thinks. We can't control what the other parent says to the kids, right?
Mm.
The best thing that we can do for these kids is show up consistently and show up in the best way we can so that when these kids come back home to us, we don't have to defend ourselves to them and say whatever daddy said or whatever mommy said is not true. And you know it's not true. And these are all the reasons it's not true, right? We just sit back and we just be ourselves and show up to the best of our capacity for our kids. And they will start recognizing the difference. They will start recognizing that's not true. Daddy said this about mom, but that's not what I'm seeing about mom. Or mommy said this about dad, but I've never seen daddy do that. Right? Like a lot of parents, I think we get defensive and it's easy to get defensive. And I have to defend myself because they said just so many terrible things about me, which are not true. So I have to defend myself. But we really have to take a couple steps back and look at what that does to our kids, right? So you have this child who is now with the high conflict parent who is being told these terrible things about you and is being told to believe them. You have to believe this because this is how this your other parent is, right? But then when they come back, so they have no choice in voice there. They're being told what to believe. And now they come back to the other parent's house. And now this parent is so busy defending themselves. We're also just telling our kids what to believe. You can't believe that. You can't think like that. You can't this. So where is their opportunity for choice and voice? Where's their opportunity for them to learn their own critical thinking? Where's their opportunity for them to observe and them to look at and come to their own decision on what they believe and what they don't believe?
Wow.
And the best way for us to do that is to be able to give them the space to do that. I don't need to defend. There's been times where I'll give you my own example. My daughter's come home and you know, she said, we had this conversation, mommy, and daddy said A, B, and C. And I'm like, oh, well, that's an interesting perspective that daddy has. I don't say daddy's wrong. I don't say daddy's right. I don't say daddy doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't say, you know, any of those things. I say that's a really interesting perspective. And she's like, what do you think about that, mommy? And I'm like, well, daddy's entitled to his opinion, kiddo. The more important thing for me is, what do you think about that? And then we have a child-focused conversation around what she thinks and why she thinks that and what she's seen that has informed her opinion about that. And when we really start unraveling that, that's when we get to a place of you get to have your own opinions, kiddo. And I think the hard thing for parents to recognize is sometimes our kids are going to have opinions that we don't agree with. And that's okay.
Wow. How much self-aware do we have to get? Like, this is interesting because usually parents don't do that. They don't take the time. It is whatever I believe, whatever my opinion is, needs to move to the baby. So like, I think this type of parenting really requires us to lay down the tools and unlearn everything we probably know about parenting and start over. And I think it can be the hardest thing to really do. But when you do it, I think it's the difference really between you being miserable and you actually doing what you can for your children. So then what have we missed when it comes to empowering parents? Because I'm still very curious with what do you do with the children? Are you saying the work empowers children through the parents? Or are you saying we also do something with the children? Or are you saying the children are only involved if they are past X stage? Help me educate, educate me on the context of the work and how, like, the boundaries of it. Because right now I feel like if we empower the parents, that change can go to the child. That's how I'm receiving it. but I know that you're more interested in the children. So help me understand are you doing some work with the children as well?
So I work specifically with the parents, and I empower the parents to empower the children. And the reason I do it that way, Prima, is because I don't have the attachment relationship with those children. The parent has the attachment relationship with those children. And through that attachment relationship and through that connection, so if we're working with children who have trauma heals through connection. And if you can heal trauma through an attachment relationship, it's going to heal faster. And the impact that they can have is so much faster. I can come in, some parents ask me, can you work with my kids directly? And I say no, because I can come in as a professional, right? Just like when you could take your kids to therapy and you take them to the doctor and all of those things, I can come in as a professional, but I'm popping in and I'm popping out, right? I'm there with them for 6 months and then I'm gone, or I'm there with them for a year and then I'm gone, right? The impact that you can have and the relationship and how you can leverage that relationship to heal their trauma and make that a long-lasting change is so much more significant than any work that I could do with them directly. And the other reason I directly work with the parents and not with the children is because you're going to be this child's parent for the rest of your life, right? I can pop in and out for, like I said, 6 months to a year, but you're going to be there forever. And for you to have the skills, for me to be able to teach the parents these skills, which is going to serve them for as long as they are this child's parent, that is the key. And that is so much more impactful and important and meaningful than me just coming in as a professional and working with them for a short term, which is why, you're totally correct, right? I empower the parents to then empower their children.
I really love your work. And if you're listening and going, this is so good, please do share this with one parent who could use some sanity in this journey. This journey doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be. That's why we have people like AJ who've laid down their life to do this work. AJ exists because his parents crying and having it so rough to parent with somebody else. And the one thing you can do for this show is really just share this message with one person you care about who's had a rough time parenting. And you feel for them. You're like, you know what? You've had enough. Let's change it. AJ, I would love for you to take me kind of through the years of working with parents and pull out for me some. I want to know what's possible, because there's probably someone listening and going, you have no idea the kind of nightmare I have to deal with. You have no idea how many emails I have to send to get one answer. You really have no idea the type of weed that is being smoked into my child's lungs every time I let them go. You really have no clue. For a parent who is thinking, I don't know, I think mine is just beyond repair, because there's a parent thinking like that. I would love for you to take us through some of the experiences that you have seen with your clients just because they said, yes, I am willing to do my best for my child, even if it comes at a price. I'm willing to pay the price. I want to kind of understand what has been happening for clients, or even for you, like the changes that can happen when you decide there is a different way to parent and you're open to that.
Yeah, I have so many examples, Prima. High conflict is just so challenging. Most of the parents I get are, like you said, you have no idea what I'm going through. This is so far gone. This is so complex. I have so many people involved. Nobody understands, and I don't know how to do this anymore. And I tell these parents there's always a way to do it. There's always a way to do it. We can absolutely put boundaries and parameters on how many emails you're sending. And it's not about how many emails you're sending. It's about getting very, very clear on how you're communicating with the other parent. When you're communicating with the other parent, do you have to communicate with the other parent? Why are you communicating with the other parent? Right? So that's also part of the program. But I'll give you a couple of very concrete examples. One I gave you already, where both
Mm.
kids were able to stand up to their dad. And these kids are not 15 or 16. These kids are 10 and 12.
Whoa. Wow.
Right? So, you know, this mom, the mom, when she came to me, was so upset and so concerned for her kids. She had a very solid relationship with her daughter and continues to have a solid relationship with her daughter. She was very concerned about her relationship with her son, who seemed to be very, very close to his high conflict dad, and started, you know, she was afraid that he was starting to exhibit the behaviors of the high conflict parent. So we have worked for her to enhance her relationship with her son and really meet him where he's at and support him in the way he needs to be supported. And it has completely opened up their relationship. Their relationship now is so much more, I would say she's so much more confident in it, and she's so much more grounded in it. And even though she sees certain behaviors that the child is exhibiting that to her are triggering for her because they resemble the other parent, we really are able to break it down from a developmental standpoint. And I tell her, you know, these behaviors that you're seeing in your 10-year-old son are actually very typical of a 10-year-old boy. It really doesn't have much to do with what he's seeing in his dad. It's when you continue to see these behaviors over 2 years, 3 years, 4 years that we start getting concerned. So let's, you know, take a little bit of pressure off. Let's accept him for who he is. Let's meet him where he's at. Make sure we're super attuned with what his needs are, and meet, you know, parent him in the way he needs to be parented, which is different than how his sister needs to be parented. And that's become, you know, amazing. And she's like, I'm so much closer to him now. And I'm not worried that he is closer to his dad and how much damage that is going to cause him. Right. There was another mom that I was working with who her son was 13. And they actually didn't have a relationship with the high conflict parent. But all of a sudden, after a couple of years, high conflict parent came back into the picture. I want a relationship with my son. I want this. I want that. And mom was very, very concerned. Mom was very dysregulated in that. And she said, I've basically told him, no, you cannot have a relationship with him. He's not a nice person. He's going to cause harm. He's A, B, C, and D. And what I told her was, that's actually going to negatively impact your relationship with him. And what she found was that her son was shutting down from her because she had said, no, you are not allowed to have a relationship with the other parent. And she was doing it from a protection standpoint, right? Because of what she had experienced. But now the son was shutting down from her. So she was like, what do I do? Because he's pulling away from me now. So then we, you know, put together a plan where I was like, this is how you're going to approach this. You're going to meet him where he's at. You're not going to push for information. You're just going to do, you know, very specific things together. You're going to show up the way he needs you to show up. And my goodness, Prima, I got an email from her and she said, we went for a walk the other day. My son opens up to me. He volunteers information to me. He talks to me like he used to talk to me before. And it's all because I supported her in taking a step back, giving him a little bit of agency, a little bit of support, and saying, this is your decision. If you want a relationship with your dad, I am always here to support you if you need me, but you're allowed to do this. These are just my concerns, and I'm going to be very open with my concerns with you. And because she was able to give him that decision-making authority and give him a little bit of, you know, give him a voice for what he chose to do, he ended up, right, reestablishing that relationship with mom that mom was so concerned about. So a lot of the parenting stuff, and I know it's so hard for parents because we want our kids, a lot of the time we want our kids to be, you know, mini versions of ourselves. Right? Like, it's like you said before, my thoughts, my values, my everything.
Yeah.
But if we really operate from a lens of our job is to support these kids through their own journey and empower them and build them up to the best of their capacity so that they can live their own life to the best of their capacity, which is, it's an interesting shift. And it's sometimes a very difficult shift, to be honest with you. But there's so many parents, like I said, that come to me and say, this is so far gone, I can't improve this. And
Mm.
it's never as far gone as you think it is.
Mm.
You can always improve it. And we can't overlook the importance of that attachment relationship that your children have to you. It's biological, it's ingrained, it's instinctual. They will always
Mm.
have an attachment relationship to you. And if we can leverage that attachment relationship and show up in the way they need us to show up,
Mm.
we can always reestablish that relationship.
Wow. I wonder if, because a lot of parents would do better if they could even just talk. I wonder if you've experienced scenarios where children actually made parents understand something about the other person that they had wrong. And I wonder if children could actually make the relationship between the parents less friction. Like, I wonder what could happen if parents didn't work out, but still kind of had compassion for the other person. And they were listening to this innocent human being talking about this is actually what mom says about you. Or, and the parent is like, really? Like, really? I thought she was, and like the children would be like, no, actually, you're wrong about mom. Like, I just wonder if you've experienced that. But I think that your work could potentially help parents be less wrong about the other person, if anything, and could help maybe not bring you back together, but really help somehow lighten something about the other parent. I don't know, of course, about the dysfunctional, but I think that there is an element where the children could actually be the source of light, you know? I don't know.
I think I think they absolutely can in non-high conflict dynamics. They absolutely
Mm.
can in non-high conflict dynamics. In high conflict dynamics, what you're going to find is if the child is going to start to defend the other parent, like if the child is going to defend the healthy parent to the high conflict parent,
Mm.
now that child has put themselves potentially in further harm because the high conflict parent will believe the high conflict parent doesn't believe that the child is an individual in and of themselves. They believe they're an
Mm.
extension of themselves. You will
Wow.
believe what I believe, you will think how I think, and
Wow.
you will act how I act, right?
Wow.
Because you are an extension of me. You are not an independent being,
Mm. Wow.
and you're a reflection of me. So if you are going to have an opinion that's different from me, now we have a problem,
Mm.
right?
So
So
what you're saying is if it's not a high conflict, if the marriage didn't work out for another reason, which is not high conflict, a lot of things will be different.
everything would be different. High
Mm.
conflict is in a category all by itself.
Mm. Okay. I don't know if I understand high conflict. What is high conflict? Because marriages
So,
don't work out for different reasons. But what I'm hearing from you is if it's a non conflict, it's just a matter of time.
yes.
You have to
So,
do some work. So help me understand how a high conflict relationship is different from like any other relationship that couldn't work for whatever reason, including
for
people
whatever.
not willing to do the work. But you're like,
Yes.
this is a high conflict. Unfortunately, our chances are so slim. And I just want people to, because I don't know what a high conflict is, if I am in one or not. Like, I don't
So
know.
there's an element, yeah, absolutely. There's an element of abuse to high conflict.
Mm.
Chances are, whether it's emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, there's an element of abuse there.
Mm.
There's an element of being dismissed, undermined, unseen, unheard, invalidated. You are not important. I am. Those elements are there. When you look at it, not relationally, but when you look at it from a co-parenting relationship,
Mm.
Prima, when you have healthy co-parenting, I
Mm.
like to call it the 4 C's. You have 4 things to establish a healthy co-parenting relationship, right? You
Mm.
have common ground, which is your children. You have
Mm.
collaboration, you have
Mm.
effective communication, and you have cooperation, right? Both parents in a healthy co-parenting relationship are wanting to work together because their common goal is the best interest of the child. And
Mm.
they will at some point be able to put their own differences aside to work together for the best interest of the child.
Give me the 4 again. Common ground, communication.
Common ground, communication, collaboration, and cooperation.
Cooperation. Okay. So what you're saying is there's a common ground, and this is a child, and both parents admit and respect or appreciate that there's a child in the picture, and differences aside, we all want what is best for this child. And then what you're saying is communication, collaboration, cooperation. What if the parents lack skill? Like what I find in my marriage, we want to communicate. Sometimes we just don't have enough skill set for that conversation. So I'm just wondering if it's more of the openness to get the skill sometimes, because for me, I feel like I'm always willing to communicate. My husband is always willing to communicate. But sometimes we just can't communicate. And I'm like, dude, we don't have the skills. Like, we are so bad at this. Like, what is this? And it's not like we don't want to do, we just don't know how to do it. And so you scream at someone and then you're like, okay, dude, this is so bad. Like, how did we get here? Like, man, we are so bad at this. So I want to understand the difference. Is it the willingness to get the skills, or is it the when you're healthy, I don't know, things are not as hard, or what? I don't understand.
You mentioned both of it. It's the self-reflection that you have where you say, oh, we just did this. This is wrong. This is not okay. Right. And it's also the willingness to learn. High conflict personalities won't have the self-reflection to say, oh, this is wrong. They will double down and say, well, you made me do this. You know, we're not communicating well because of you.
Wow.
I don't have any issues communicating.
Wow.
Right. It's a you problem. And then the willingness to learn. So if you at that point say, okay, let's take some communication classes, or let's do this. I don't need to take any communication classes. I know how to communicate. You're the problem. You need to take the communication classes.
Wow.
So how do you then communicate with somebody like that? Right. So I'll give you a very distinct example with my own daughter when she was having really high behaviors, right? In a normal co-parenting relationship, you could email the other person and you can say, you know what, look, our kid's struggling. Can you please let me know if she's having the same behaviors at your house? I'd like to come up with a plan. Maybe we can do transitions days differently. How can we work together to best support her? Maybe when you drop her off, you come into the house and you sit with her for half an hour and then you leave, right? Let's ease that transition. Let's do that. So that's the kind of response you would see in healthy co-parenting. What you find in high conflict. So when I emailed her dad and said, you know, there's these behaviors that I'm seeing that I'm really concerned about, what I got in response was, I don't see any of those behaviors at my house. Those behaviors are happening at your house because you don't know how to parent. You don't know what you're doing. You have no rules. You have no boundaries. Her behaviors are your problem and you can figure it out.
Wow.
And don't talk to me about this again.
Wow. So there's unwillingness to even think that something is wrong. Oh, okay. Now this is another level. This is another level of this human being is just not willing to change.
They're just not willing.
Anything. Wow. Wow. I can see what that is. Wow.
That's why it becomes so complex and so challenging for parents to be like, well, how do I communicate with this person? And that's where we kind of draw the line. I say, you don't communicate with that person unless it's absolutely necessary. And then we communicate in a very specific way that's more likely to get you the outcome that you need.
I really love where we are right now. Like, I love how much we've covered. I would like to try and I would like to try and recap, and then you can kind of see where I am with how we've come, and you can let me know like what I'm missing in there. So if you find yourself in a high conflict situation and you push your way and have the kids and you reach a point where you just can't have it anymore, it's not the perfect situation, but it is the situation. And so there's 2 ways to go around it. One, you can decide you're a culprit of it and watch your children duplicate the same thing when they grow up. Or You can't decide it ends with you, and you're going to do your best not to duplicate yourself in your children because you haven't been the best role model at that point. And so you can decide, you know what, I want better for my children. And the things I have done, I don't want them to do them. The mistakes I've done, I want to give them a chance not to do those mistakes. When parents work with AJ, there is things she talked about. It's like you're sending off a child to another country, to a camping site, and you're just making sure they have everything they need. And so the first thing you can do for yourself is really to be regulated. You can't be spiking and crashing and expect yourself to help another person. It's like you're on a plane and the plane has a problem and you're trying to save everybody else without a mask on. Like it really doesn't work. And so the best thing you can do for yourself is to help yourself regulate, which is more like just tools for that. Whatever you need, is it breath work? Is it journaling? Is it self-care? I don't know what the tools are, but there is need for you to emotionally regulate so that you can make decisions from a point of love, not fear, and not any other place which may not be helpful. The second one was to understand why you can and can't control, because I think the worst thing that can happen to a human being is trying to change another human being. What can you control versus what can you not control? Because one of them you can do, you can make progress, you can actually feel good. The other one, you just drain yourself day by day, day by day. And maybe if you look back, wanting to change this person is what got you where you are. What is within your power to control? I love really how that is coming. Eliminate distractions. I don't know that I remember how she explained that. Eliminate distractions. What kind of distractions are we eliminating, AJ? Help me here. I think I forgot the point.
I would say the most distracting thing you want to eliminate is behaviors from the other parent. So if you're getting like, a lot of very abusive emails from them, you're getting a lot of abusive communication from them, phone calls, text messages, things like that. How do we eliminate all those distractions? Because they're taking your attention away from being present with your kids, right? So I encourage parents to eliminate all forms of communication except email. Only communicate through email and only for very specific reasons.
I like that, because the other person may not even be coping well and they want to drag you in their failure to cope. And so they keep calling, they keep texting, they keep saying things, they keep talking to your parents, and it's just destructive because they can't get themselves to move on. But they want to drag you in the process. They don't want to be in your life, or you can't be in their life, but they want you to be a part of their everyday drama. I really get that. Like you don't have to deal with that. You don't have to deal with that. Why should you deal with that? It's not your problem. Like it doesn't even help you at all. If at all, it really takes away from your ability to even help the children, So the other one was environment, really watching the environment, especially when the kids come in. Are you creating the best environment you could be creating for them to thrive, to flourish, to feel safe, to feel like they're not a mistake in this world? I had a guest the other day who said, my daughter told me, I feel so bad I was born, because if I weren't born, you wouldn't have been with dad for all this time. So how can we avoid those things? Because children can wake up and feel like a mistake, especially if the other parent has the ability to scream at them and tell them whatever. If they're not conscious of what is coming out of their mouth, they can begin to feel like a mistake. When that guest of mine said that, I was like, oh my God. I was like, it's true. I couldn't have stayed with the dad if she hadn't been born, but she had been the most precious thing in my life. And for me to see her looking at herself as a mistake was heartbreaking. It was. So if you don't watch your environment and you don't watch how kids are getting in and what kind of feeling they're getting from it, they can start to feel like that. Because first of all, not being with two parents, depending on what's happening on the outside at school, can be something on its own, where every time parents are coming together to pick kids, to visit kids, and, you're just there, and maybe one of your parents comes and no one comes, and, the other kids can bully the child and say, what's wrong with your parents? you know? And sometimes really children can feel like, why don't I have parents? Why are my parents talking together? Why aren't they coming together? And I think the life of that child really starts to be delicate from the point where they have to be dealing with two parents who can't kind of, be on the same page. The other one that she said the point was more attuned, like you have to be self-aware. The chances of parenting as a blindfolded person have been cut down at this point. But when you are married to somebody who is highly conflicting emotionally, your chances of going blindfolded have been cut half. And so you don't really have that chance of just being a parent who screams at kids and has no idea of their own regulation. I think you really don't have as much liberty when you're dealing with a child who is subjected to, this kind of thing. And then the other thing that she talked about was building more capacity for yourself. I would imagine it's building the resilience and the capacity to maybe even unlearn and learn new things and accept new truth. Really, the capacity to contain it all, the capacity to hold the other person, because they'll show up, they'll drop the kids, and who knows what they will say when they drop them. They will email you, and who knows what will be in that email. They will meet another person. God knows what they will say about you before they, to just justify themselves. So your capacity to really go through things that you don't believe necessarily, or even your capacity to watch your child say, Mom, I really think you're wrong about this. Or even your child deciding maybe they want to live with the other person forever. Or you go to court and they decide they want to be with the other person who you really think is not helping, but it's what the child wants. Or maybe the toxic things from the other parent have gotten to the child, and now the child is making a decision from that. And if you don't have capacity, how can you possibly move past that, knowing that it's not the best decision for the child? So I think that's what she means when she talks about capacity and being able to contain whatever the situation, being able to relate with the child in all ways, being able to respond or even understand why they're responding how they're responding, being able to really just study that and be the master of that and know what to do with that situation. And then repair and reconnect is more like things will go off, you're a human being, and so some things will not go well. But it's not about how things go wrong, it's your ability to recollect and repair. AJ, what did I miss there? I'm just trying to represent the listener and going, yeah, hopefully we got lost somewhere. What did we miss there? Like, I'm just trying to make sure we are with you. What did we miss?
Nothing. I think that summary was great. We covered basically everything. The one thing I would add, Prima, is we really have to get to a place, and I'm speaking to the capacity piece, we have to get to a place where we have to just let go of what the other parent is or isn't doing, right? We have to let go of that anger. We have to let go of, trying to fix and control and all of that, because the anger that you hold around what's happening to your kids at the other parent's house is not serving you, and it's not serving your kids. And we're never going to be able to change what that other parent is doing. So we're just going to let that go. We're going to focus on ourselves and our own self-care when our kids are at the other parent's house. And then we have to show up, right? So this is the hard part about this parenting model, is we have to show up at like 150% capacity to support these kids, because they have gotten little to nothing when they're at the high conflict parent's house, right? The high conflict parent is all about, yes, they're going in the minus. The high conflict parents is all about themselves. They can't provide those kids with what they need. So when these kids come back, what I see when the kids come back is, like you said, they either come back completely empty or they're coming back in the minus.
Yeah, because they're just draining and draining. Wow.
Yes, they have nothing left.
That's really good, because if you don't fill up and even overflow, you're not going to like it because every time you send them over, it's like they just came back empty or in the mud.
Yes.
And it's not something that is very human for you to accept that that work has to be redone and redone and redone, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest work, is to release and let go and find a way not to have resentment in your heart, because you will, and just be okay with overfeeling and having the portion they are missing on your plate and say, it's fine, I can give you whatever. Wow. Tell me
Because
about what did I miss there?
no, I was going to say the
Mm,
big piece is that the focus needs to shift, right? We need to
mm.
shift our focus from focusing on the other parent to focusing on the children.
Yeah, I love it. Tell me about the containers in the back. I know you support parents. I know you have an 8 weeks group. I can't remember if you do one-on-one or if you do group container alone. Help me, remind me of your exact way you support people.
So primarily I do group work,
Mm,
and that is my 8-week fundamentals course where I take people through 8 weeks of really learning the
mm,
fundamentals around attachment
mhm,
and relationship
mhm,
and why we're going to do things the way we're doing them, and the environment and how to create a trauma healing environment and how to talk about authenticity and the attachment piece and all of that stuff. We go through all of it, right? From a
mm,
very neurobiological developmental psychology lens to
mhm,
have that foundation. And
mhm,
that's my 8-week group program. I do it in a group format so that other parents connect with other parents, because sometimes when you're in high conflict, it can feel very, very isolating and people can feel very alone and
mm,
like nobody understands what they're going through. So this way they can connect with each other also. And then within that group container, I also offer a little bit of one-on-one time where we
mm,
can really take the parenting program and curate it and
mm,
customize it so that it meets the needs of your individual children. So we do that.
mm,
And then I also on occasion offer one-on-one work on request.
mm,
Um, and that's for more complex situations where we can really, really get into the weeds of it,
mm.
and reestablish a new way to move forward for the healthy parent and the children. So primarily both those two ways.
I love it. I will be putting links to connect with AJ, social media, everywhere. But most importantly, I'll be putting a link below where you can book a free conversation with AJ to see if her work is for you, you know? But if you're not quite ready for that conversation, AJ has a ton of work out there where you can start. So wherever you are, don't worry about it. There is a way to start with AJ work. And I'm going to personally put the links below, whether you're on the podcast platforms or on video platform. Simply scroll in the notes and you should see every way. But what I would encourage you to do, if you know you're having this high conflict problem, move, book the call. It's not worth it. It's not worth your sanity. You don't have to be in this situation. There
Your
is
kids
better.
don't have to, your
Yeah.
kids don't have to be in this situation.
They don't really have to. Your kids deserve better. And you don't really know how long you have with them. The last thing you need is tomorrow you're gone and you just left your daughter to duplicate your life. Like it's not really good. But what you can do most importantly, think about a parent you care about, who this is swallowing up, and share this conversation with them. That is the premise of the podcast. That is the biggest thing you can do for me, is to share AJ's work with one person that you know could use sanity in their parenting. AJ, we're winding up, but I would love to know your last words for someone who is listening and going, I don't know, it's too late for me, or whatever the thing on their heart is that gets them to think, do I even deserve it? Do I even deserve to try again? Damage is done. Whatever the thing is that is stopping them from booking that call, help me speak into their heart because I want them to move.
I would say don't give up, and it's never too late. And
Yeah.
our children absolutely deserve better than what they've gotten.
Mm,
And we need to show up for these kids because they deserve to not repeat our mistakes and not repeat the intergenerational trauma and not repeat the cycle of trauma over and over again. We got to break them out of that. We got to break them out of that so they have a hope in establishing and building and moving on to live the best life that they can live, right? This doesn't have to be a life sentence for them. We can absolutely shift it. And it's, you know what, because you have that attachment relationship, it's absolutely never too late. And don't give up. Don't give up. Even if your kids are not speaking to you, even if your kids are siding with the other parent, always keep showing up. Just don't give up.
I love it. I like to say that I'm a believer in God, and I love to say God can't put something on your plate unless he knows that you have the capacity to contain it. And so God did put the kids in the world and made you their parent. In the same vessel, he gave you the capacity to contain whatever the process is. I believe that nothing happens for nothing. AJ wouldn't be doing this work if God hadn't placed a partner on her lap that forced her to do this work. And you wouldn't be in the situation you're in or even on this podcast if God didn't think that you had the capacity to turn things around. And so I just want to just encourage the parent who might be listening and say to them that your kids deserve the best that you can give them. And you have the capacity, but sometimes you just need to say yes to the help when it comes so that somebody can help you step into that person that you know you need to be to help your kids. I sincerely hope this podcast episode has served you. I hope you will share it with one person. I hope you will subscribe, you will follow, you will rate, and all of the things, because the world's best kept secret is building one day at a time. And I personally believe that this work wouldn't be on my heart if there wasn't anyone crying for the help. But what I mostly believe is the how is not mine. It doesn't belong to me. And so now that you're here, share, subscribe, rate, review, and let's leave the rest to whoever put this calling on both our hearts. I appreciate you. Have a beautiful day. That is it, my friend. To listen to more exclusive interviews like this one, simply go to the world's best kept secret podcast.com and select interviews based on preferred topic.